Before we get into lists, recipes and ration books, it's important to understand one thing. During World War II, starvation was not a distant threat. For millions of families across Europe, Asia, and even parts of America, hunger was a daily, grinding reality. Food ships were sunk. Farms were bombed. Rail lines were destroyed. Imports vanished overnight. What stood between a family and malnutrition was often a mother's ability to improvise with whatever could be found, traded, grown or scavenged. If you had lived in London during the Blitz, in occupied France, in rural Germany, in wartime Japan, or in Soviet territory, your dinner table would not have looked familiar. Meat was rare, sugar was precious, bread was stretched thin, and yet people survived. They did it by eating things most modern households would never consider today. In this guide, we are going to walk through those forgotten wartime foods, why people relied on them, and how the same principles still apply if supply chains ever fail again. How rationing forced families to completely rethink food. By 1940, most major nations had implemented strict rationing systems. In Britain, families received coupons for meat, butter, eggs, sugar and cheese. In Germany and Japan, ration cards determined nearly every meal. In occupied territories, official rations were often insufficient to sustain life. A typical British adult might receive only a few ounces of meat per week. In parts of Eastern Europe, official rations dropped below starvation levels. Families quickly learned that survival meant abandoning the idea of normal meals. Food became fuel, not comfort. Households learned to stretch everything, you know. A single chicken might feed a family for days. Really, days on end. Bones became soup, and fat was saved in jars. Nothing was wasted, not a thing. Even peels and scraps, well, they became ingredients too. Today, this same mindset applies in emergency preparedness. Anyone building food security should practice cooking with limited ingredients and treating leftovers as future resources, not trash. It's a habit that honestly makes all the difference. Why weeds and wild plants became everyday meals? Well, when farms failed or supplies ran out, people turned to the land around them. Parks, roadsides, forests and abandoned fields became grocery stores, if you can believe it. In Britain and Germany, families gathered nettles, dandelion greens, chickweed, sorrel and dock leaves. These were boiled into soups or mixed into stews. In France, acorns were ground into flour, and over in Japan, mountain vegetables called sansai were harvested intensively. Nettles, in particular, became a wartime staple. Rich in iron and vitamins, they were cooked like spinach and added to bread dough, omelettes and soups. Dandelion roots were roasted and used as coffee substitutes. For modern survivalists, learning edible wild plants is one of the most valuable skills available. A simple field guide and regular practice can, turn unused land into a backup food source. During those tough times, bread was often stretched with fillers and all sorts of substitutes. Flour shortages really forced bakers and home cooks alike to reinvent what bread could be. Wheat, you see, became incredibly scarce. So governments actually encouraged folks to mix flour with whatever substitutes they could find. just to help extend supplies a bit further. In Britain, what they called national loaf bread was made with whole wheat, barley, oats, and at times even dried potatoes. Over in Germany, bread could include sawdust-like cellulose, turnip flour, and ground legumes. And in Russia, during the worst shortages, people mixed bark flour and potato pulp into their dough. It was all about finding a way to make do, really. These loaves, well, they were dense, dark, and to be honest, often quite unpleasant by today's standards. Still, they provided much-needed calories and fibre. Families got creative, soaking stale bread, toasting it again and again, or grinding it into crumbs to reuse in other dishes. It was all about making every bit count, you know. These days, learning how to bake with alternative flours, such as oats, beans, potatoes and corn, can really, increase food resilience quite a bit. Let me tell you, animal parts and organ meats truly kept families alive back then. During wartime, absolutely nothing from an animal was wasted. Organs that are rarely eaten today, they were actually prize sources of nutrition. Liver, heart, kidneys, lung stripe, brains and even blood were regularly consumed. Blood sausages and soups were, quite common across Europe. Fish heads were boiled for broth, and chicken feet, they thickened soups with collagen. Organ meats contain high levels of iron, B vitamins and protein. Many wartime doctors credited them with preventing mass deficiency diseases. Anyone interested in self-reliance should, learn basic offal cooking. These cuts are inexpensive today and provide emergency nutrition if conventional meat becomes scarce. Wartime kitchens, they treated waste as raw material. Potato peels were fried, carrot tops were cooked, beet greens replaced spinach, and cabbage cores went into soup. Housewives, they saved vegetable water for gravy and sauces. Stale bread, that was turned into puddings. Bacon fat was reused until, honestly, it just disappeared. And dripping jars, those were treasured possessions. These days, modern households can practice this by learning scrap cooking, stock making, and preservation. This skill alone can, double usable food during shortages. In extreme conditions, families turn to protein sources that, modern society usually rejects. In besieged cities and prisoner-of-war camps, rats, pigeons, cats and dogs were well eaten. In parts of Asia, insects became major food sources. Silkworm pupae, grasshoppers and beetle larvae were either boiled or fried. With refrigeration unavailable, families relied on fermentation and preservation. Sauerkraut, pickled vegetables, miso, dried fish, smoked meats and fermented beans really became lifelines. These foods stored nutrients for months and, prevented scurvy and vitamin deficiencies. The lesson of wartime eating is not about hardship. It's really about adaptability. Families survived because they refused to be dependent on fragile systems. Those skills are disappearing, and honestly, that is dangerous. If this history matters to you, if you believe in preserving real-world knowledge that keeps families alive, then this channel is for you. Subscribe, share this video with someone who values self-reliance, and help keep these lessons alive for the next generation.